state senator and House of Representatives candidates, but the election's in the next year. So Mr. Crow is the only current candidate there. He sounds great. I think it's going to be a very competitive race, and it's going to come down to, like a lot of them come down to, is how much money each candidate's got. It looks to me like there's three major candidates. Mr. Crow, Ms. Stokes, Julie Stokes is in the lead fundraising wise, and Rick Edmonds as far as the Republicans go.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, Kyle Ardoin, the current Secretary of State.
Now, on the Democratic side, I understand the last poll I saw was the Democrat free was leading by double digits. Any change?
No change there. I think it's going to be if there is such a thing as a typical Louisiana election where there's a Democrat that has enough name ID and enough support to get in double digits and force a runoff, and then whichever Republican can get the highest percentage will be the runoff. The Democrat is what it's looking like right now.
So, what do you think are the main issues? I mean, are there any issues at all in terms of that particular race?
Well, what they talk about really is the ones that understand what the job is they talk about cybersecurity for the elections. Mr. Crow also talked about the what looks like a pretty messy RFP, request for proposal process, right, that led to the changing out of the current voting machines. They need to be updated every once in a while. And ours are quite old from a software and hardware perspective, so we want to make them as secure as possible. And in order to do that, you have to basically go out and buy new ones. But it looks to me like we did some kind of sole source contract letting, and I'm not a big fan of that. I want to see competitive contracts and those kind of things. So Mr. Crow's focused on that. And his message really is also not just about elections, but about the largest part of the Secretary of State's jobs, and that's establishing and new businesses and monitoring them and keeping the paperwork on them, filing records and making sure that the appropriate public records are kept and not destroyed either inadvertently or on purpose, and those kind of things. And the one candidate that really has a depth of experience in that is Mr. Crow. Unfortunately, he's also lagging in fundraising. Stokes and Ardoin are the two fundraising leaders, and then Crow not too far behind them. So it is going to come down to messaging on TV. It's a statewide race, but it's one of those races where they're definitely not getting out and on the ground as much as a normal race would, because it was a very short time frame that they had to do it, less than 3 months. So, it should be interesting as we go forward and see who is most effective in their television ads.
Okay, folks, look, if you're watching, please go ahead and share. Please go ahead and share. Please go ahead and like. See that Brad Rummel has given the thumbs up. And we'd love to get your comments and get your feedback on some of these issues. Now, there's some congressional races. Do you have a feel for any of them? Do you think any of them are going to be competitive?
Honestly, I don't think so. It looks like the incumbents are well in the lead in all of the districts, including the Democrat district. District 2 was Cedric Richmond, and none of the candidates really have really beefed up with large amounts of money coffers. And as we know, that's how you get your message out, Steve. You've got to have enough funding to get your message out. You don't have to raise as much money as an incumbent does, but you have to have enough. And I haven't seen that anybody has been able to do that. The congressional race in District 1, Mr. Scalise has got it handily from my perspective. And again, while there may be some good candidates in that race, and I think there are some good people in that race, they just don't have the resources in order to take somebody like that on.
Sure, sure. Now, what about the third congressional?
Out there with our friend Mr. Clay Higgins.
Yeah.
In the third congressional, I think that if there is going to be a competitive race, it would be that one. But they really just don't have the candidate singled out that can bring the resources to bear and the message to bear to take Clay on.
Okay, that's my take. That's my take. Now, what about up there in North Louisiana? I understand that Dr. Abraham is considering running for governor. So do you think that that's going to have an impact upon this race? That he's running now for U.S. Congress.
Yeah, I think Doc Abrams is sounds like he's definitely in
Mm-hmm.
on the governor's race, but he is going to run for congressional reelection, and I'm sure there'll be an outcome of that if the Doc does have the ability to win the governor's race. Then they will go into a special election to replace him in that district. Your usual suspects up there are going to probably try to run in that race, but there may be a newcomer too. There's some good folks that I've seen in the Secretary of State's race that I think are up and comers that will be challenging. I think if any open seats come up for sure.
Okay. Now, by the way, I just want to say this that I'm going to be giving away a prize. Basically, as you know, we'll put together these webinars dealing with elections, and I'll be talking about those in a few minutes. And I'm going to ask the first person to just type in the word that I mentioned, and they will have it's worth $100, but it's a video for webinars. Some of the finest election specialists in the state. So we'll talk about that in a few seconds. Anything else going on statewide before we talk about some of the federal issues?
Well, I think we continue to hear things about the upcoming governor's race on the Republican side. The Republicans firmly want to defeat John Bel Edwards and make him a one-term governor. They know it's an uphill climb and it's a challenge, but they're the potential candidates that are out there. I think it's all going to hinge on how the outcome of the congressional races are, not in our state necessarily, but in who controls the House as to exactly what happens with the governor's race next year. Because two of our strongest candidates would be Steve Scalise, even though I know he said he's not going to do it, but you just never know what's going to factor into somebody's decision if the House changes hands and they're no longer in Republican leadership positions over there. But also Senator John Kennedy has talked about the governor's race during the last year, so that's another potential candidate. And those are very, very strong candidates that probably, in my opinion, are probably the two most capable of taking on the governor and making him one term.
Sure,
yep.
Sure. Now, Senator Kennedy has gotten a tremendous amount of publicity on cable news, etc. Has been kind of the go-to guy. He's going to give all that up?
You think he's going to give all that up?
Yeah.
Well, in the state of Louisiana, we're an unusual state. The governor's seat is the seat most sought after in our state, and it wouldn't surprise me. Mr. Kennedy's expressed interest in wanting to run for that seat before, and he said that he would still be looking at it. I think in the spring of this year. So it wouldn't nothing from those guys up there will surprise me, because this governor's seat is the most highly sought after seat amongst politicians in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah, but still, I mean, he's certainly, even though he's one of 100, I mean, he's gotten, I think, his share of attention, more so than most. I mean, he's really made an impact in a short period of time. In terms of getting attention.
Yeah, from my perspective, he's done very, very well and outperformed a lot of folks' expectations, especially on the conservative side of the Republican Party. And we're very pleased with what Senator Kennedy's been able to get accomplished up there, and continue to look forward to having him there. And if he decides to run for governor, we'll see how that goes. But he is doing a fine job as a senator in the state. We really appreciate it, and we will look forward to see what his plans are for the future.
Okay, that's fair enough. Um, so let's talk about. Actually, let's see if anybody have a question. Anybody have a comment? We'd love to hear from you. Again, we are going to be giving away 4 webinars at the end of the show. So please stay with us. I'll be presenting the information to you, and the first person who actually types in this the keyword I give you, then you'll get the free webinar, 4 of them actually, and I'll go into detail about those shortly. So if you have any questions, any comments with Rob Maness, please go ahead and provide them. Do you see anything online that you wanted to address at this point?
Well, I appreciate the comments on my fan page at
Sure.
COL Rob Maness, and I appreciate Brad Rummel sharing that. Everybody, please, as Steve asked, please do share the stream. We are broadcasting live on all of my Facebook pages and on our Periscope on at Rob Maness on Twitter. So we appreciate the audience, and there's a lot going on, Steve. Washington was kind of quiet. We were up there meeting with staffers on the House Committee on Veterans Affairs. One of the bills we were working was passed unanimously by the House. So we wanted to go up and give the staffers a update because there's been a hiccup on the Senate side in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, and we're trying to help them through that so we can get this bill passed because we're running out of time. As you know, they'll come back for a short period of time after the election, then go home for Thanksgiving, and then come into a lame duck session. And it's very difficult to get a bill through the Senate back to the House to get it approved and signed by the president before the end of the year. So we may end up having to go back to next year with that bill. It's unfortunate, but that's the way the system works, you know. But we did see Senator Bill Cassidy on the way up to Washington. We saw him in the airport and had a good conversation with him, and he's on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, so he's one of the folks that we are really relying on to help us get that bill out of committee to the Senate floor. And we were able to see Senator Kennedy while we were in Washington as he was headed to the airport. We ran into him. So he's aware of the bill too. So I appreciate both of our senators that are advocates for veterans and are really helping folks out when it comes to that type of effort and everything. But there's a lot going on too in the media world, as you know. This thing with Jamal Khashoggi, who is a columnist for the Washington Post, that apparently has been either kidnapped and murdered, or kidnapped and is being held prisoner somewhere. This incident apparently occurred at the consulate in Turkey, but nobody's really given any of the evidence yet that they say they have. The Turks have not. The media outlets that I'm monitoring are almost exclusively quoting Turkish media releases, but they say they have video and audio evidence, and none of that's been seen by anyone. So we're very concerned when somebody that is a columnist in the press ends up getting hurt by a government because of what they're saying. Obviously, here in our country, we believe in free speech, and we believe in a free press, and we don't want the government to take action against the press in any way whatsoever. I disagree with when President Obama tried to do it through the government, and I disagree with it if the government here tries to do anything to any of our journalists, whether they be big media or small media. It's not the right thing to do because it's their job to hold everybody accountable. And this gentleman apparently was trying to hold the Saudi government accountable, and it looks like he may have paid a terrible, terrible price for it.
So, based upon all the information that you have, say, researched and have watched on TV, etc., I mean, do you have any feel for what happened?
Well, Mr. Khashoggi has been increasingly trying to hold the Saudi government accountable and pressing for free speech and more freedom in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. He even moved to the United States as a resident, basically a self-exile, because he had been told to shut up by the Saudis, from what I've seen. Unfortunately, though, he's also an advocate for an organization called the Muslim Brotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
That, in my professional opinion, as someone who's fought terrorism for almost 35 years of my life, and this is an agreement with most other American experts on terrorism that understand what it takes to fight the war we're unfortunately in. The Muslim Brotherhood should be a terrorist organization, but we do not list them as that here in the United States, as far as I know. However, the Saudi government did. So Mr. Khashoggi's message is somewhat fuzzy because he tends to advocate for the Muslim Brotherhood when a lot of people on different sides really think of them as the enemy because of what they have done and what they tried to do after the so-called Arab Spring in Egypt, which resulted in their downfall and the imprisonment of the president. So, unfortunately, since that message is mixed from Khashoggi, you have even Republicans and conservatives are having mixed reactions to what's going on, and I think the president finds himself in a bit of a sticky wicket, as they might say, because the Saudis have just recently come around to being very, very good allies in the war on terror. But at the same time, we can't stand and say nothing and not try to take the moral high ground and represent the moral high ground if somebody's going out and kidnapping and murdering journalists and columnists like that just because they speak out against them.
Or anybody who, I mean, in this case, the guy was a resident of the United States, was not a citizen but a resident.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think that we have an obligation to protect citizens and residents, and so from what I could gather, it seemed to me like the king has gotten involved. He's taken off from his nap.
You never know with the Saudi royal family. As a matter of fact, MBS, the crown prince that's in charge right now, is being accused of doing this operation. But the Turks are adamantly opposed to Mohammed bin Salman, and because he has done some things to try to do reforms in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and so it's very difficult for me to trust just the word of the Turks. And within the Saudi government and royal family itself, there are different factions, and MBS actually imprisoned and arrested a bunch of the folks that would oppose reforms and more freedom of religion and more freedom of speech and freedom of action in Saudi Arabia. But he's also been accused of being an oppressive dictator type for doing that. So they find themselves in a very difficult situation because they have a royal system, but they also are the keepers of Islam, Medina and Mecca and those kind of things. So it's a very difficult position that he finds himself in. And it wouldn't surprise me that when the truth comes out on Mr. Khashoggi is that somebody ran an operation, more than likely from that consulate, but isn't necessarily on the same side as the current crown prince within the royal family. That's happened before. I think that's why you see differing of opinions on the Saudi family and government's involvement in the 9/11 attacks. There was evidence in one of the consulates that they were supporting some of these guys that were floating around here that ended up flying airplanes into buildings. But there wasn't enough evidence to say that the royal family and the government of Saudi Arabia was behind it. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's the way the outcome comes out on this.
Okay. By the way, we did have a question dealing with the governor's race from Brad Rummel. We'll talk about that in the closing moments of our program. So we have election season coming up. We're less than 3 weeks away from midterms. My friend Jeff Carrere wrote a column that I put up on Bayou Buzz today, and it's a red alert to stop the blue wave. So is it time for a red alert?
Well, I think it is. I think that based on what I'm seeing and hearing, that the control of the House is going to be very, very close. I've said for the last 3 or 4 weeks, based on the data that I've been able to see in the open source media, that they might keep the House just barely. I think it's even more cloudy a picture now, and quite frankly, it's a toss up. It's up in the air whether the Democrats will be able to flip the House or not. I think the Senate is in good hands. Just it's what's gonna matter is how many more, or if we get any more as far as Republicans go, more than 51 votes. If they get up to 55 votes, then counting a Joe Manchin, you've got
Mm-hmm.
56 votes there, and that can make all the difference in the world on what gets done. But if the Democrats take the House, nothing's going to get done. They'll be spending all their time in the Senate trying to stop what we see as crazy things from happening. More than likely, unfortunately.
So it seems to me the Democrats will take the House if they shut up for the next 3 weeks. I mean,
Well,
if they don't do anything, say anything, I think they let the president do all the talking. I think they might take the House.
Well, fortunately, they're not shutting up. And we've seen in the last 24 hours that Republican candidates have actually had violence committed against them in other states. We've seen uh, Republican campaigns be attacked with physical assault on their signs and have video evidence of it in other states. And what we don't see from the Democrat leadership is a full and total renouncing of political violence from their side, and that's disgusting. Look, I don't like it when the president of the United States, you know, can basically creates a perception that he thinks it's okay that some politicians did a smackdown on a reporter because they asked a question for him. But that's nothing compared to what we've seen from the left and from the leadership of the left. I mean, Nancy Pelosi even said just the other day that, well, the people that oppose us have to expect some collateral damage. Well, what the heck kind of language is that? That's military language, Steve, and
Mm-hmm.
and I can't believe that anybody would accept that as a acceptable form of political discourse in the United States of America. And it's just gotten really beyond the pale from the left and the Democrats. And I'm not saying that they have total control over it, but they need to be talking, and they need to be talking in firm terms that this political violence is unacceptable.
I don't disagree at all. Actually, I personally have been very public about the Democrats, again, making sure that they don't do anything, say anything, because it's going to come back and haunt them. And so it's really up to them in that regard. And I was serious about if they're quiet, they may let Donald Trump make the mistakes. I will say this: I think that there's been a lot of uh, uh, I'm going to say overstatements from the Republican side. I mean, for example, some of the things that they're saying that I think Hillary Clinton and the former Attorney General saying clearly were not violent oriented. Certainly not as violent as what the president did yesterday. And so, um, the point I'm making is that the Republicans have really tried to make this into the Democrats are dangerous, they're violent. And
Now I was on
when,
an airplane most of the
yeah,
day yesterday. What did the president do besides make fun of the politician that had to plead guilty to assault on the reporter?
well, I mean that's pretty serious, though. I mean, he actually uh, went into a feigned body slam, and I mean that's similar to the statement that he said before about trying to get the police to get the arrestees to hit their head on the top, the bottom ceiling of the car, the roof of the car. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. You know, it's insane to for Republicans and Democrats. I don't care where they are or who they are. It's just insane for them to put up code words that can be suggestive of
I
whether
don't think that was code word. That's why I called them out on it just now. I mean, that's wrong. You shouldn't be doing that.
well, and I'm saying that I think it's I mean I don't think he's out there saying, hey, look, we need to body slam these people, and I don't think that anybody on the Democrat side have said that either, or basically said, hey, get out there and do some violence. I hadn't seen that. Okay, I've seen words that are totally misplaced and shameful. But
So you didn't see Maxine Waters
oh, I
tell
did.
her
I
orders to
did.
get in people's faces and get up on them and all that, and then you see video of Ted Cruz and his wife being run out of a restaurant in Washington D.C. and
Yeah.
Pam
No.
Bondi,
No. No.
General of Florida, trying to be intimidated. That's violence. That is assault. Uh, you know, uh, and that's a direct result of the language and the instigating that the leaders of the Democratic Party and people in office are doing. The president's supporters, we haven't seen that from them. But I'll tell you what, you will see that the supporters of the president of the United States all firmly believe in the Second Amendment. And what you will see is that if their lives are threatened, they'll defend themselves. And then it'll be sad because that blood will be on the folks' hands who didn't denounce political violence aggressively. And like you said, even the president and the way he does it in the context of a rally where maybe he was being humorous or not, it's the wrong thing to do because people take that type of language differently.
As far as Maxine Waters, I mean, I read a number of times what she said. I heard what she said, and again, I mean, please understand that when she said that, and I read that, and I saw the next day, I think it was, where this Secretary of Homeland Security got, I don't want to say accosted, but certainly, made her dinner very unpleasant, and I thought it was absolutely insane. I commented about that. He said, Democrats, you're gonna, if you continue doing these kind of things, it's really going to come back and it's going to hurt you. And I had a Democrat friend take me to task on Twitter, and and told me, I mean, really went after me. So look, I mean, I've been very open and forward about, you can't make these statements. Point I'm making is this. Maxine Waters, what she did say was, you're right, get into her face. That's not an issue of violence. Now, you can interpret it as being violent, just like you can interpret, going after the knees as being violent. But, it's not like saying, hey, look, get in there and punch them in the face, which is kind of like what the governor candidate for from Pennsylvania actually threatened his opponent of that he was going to punch him in the face and or step on his face. I mean, that's over the line. Getting into the face, that's, it's not the same. So regardless, that all of it is just nuts. And the point I'm making is that I don't think that the Republicans should make that a big deal, because they're doing what they're doing is just as bad.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Come on, you can't draw a moral equivalence between the two.
Oh, sure.
You're talking about humorous rhetoric versus non-humorous rhetoric.
We're talking about the president of the United States.
That's serious, Steve. And I talked to a lot of the Capitol Hill security folks in my week up in Washington today to see what their experiences were like during the week of the Kavanaugh hearings, and that is not within your rights. These men and women were telling me how folks were really putting themselves in danger, putting the security forces in danger, putting the elected officials in danger by taking these actions that they were taking. And that is violence. When you see crowds of people beating on the door of the Supreme Court, that's a violent action and political violence, and it's been incited by the leaders of the Democrat Party and those that fund them. And it's absolutely not what the Republican Party has done. I don't care what the President of the United States has said. I can count on one hand the incidents of physical contact or approaching physical contact that could even remotely be attributed to anything that he has said. And I can't think of all the things that we've seen from the other side. Even Secretary Nielsen's incident, I had forgotten that. But it's ridiculous and it's crazy, and the Democrats should pay for it on November 6th if they don't renounce it.
Oh no,
I hope there's a red
absolutely.
tsunami, but like I said, I'm truthful here, and I think it's pretty much dead even, and the Democrats may actually be one or two ahead. So if you're a Republican and a conservative and you're opposed to political violence, you better get out there and vote.
Again, let me just say this. I think that you talking about a lady banging on a door of the Supreme Court, and that's, it's foolish. Was
Not
anybody?
one lady,
No, but
500. That's not
they
foolish.
weren't
That's
all banging.
violence.
They weren't all
Look at the
banging on.
pictures.
I did. They weren't all banging on the doors of the Supreme Court. You had from what I remember, that had two ladies. One looked like she was having a hysterical fit. To be able to trace that, do we have invoices? Do we know the Democratic Party was paying this lady to do that? I mean, I think we got to be careful of saying, look, this is a party actually going there and directing those people to do that, versus the President of the United States openly saying on national TV, that's his type of guy, somebody who's going to do a body thrust upon a reporter, especially given what has happened already with his statements about the media, the media being the enemy of the people, and then people getting the Boston Globe getting threatened by a nutcake from California who used the same words as the president. I mean, they're both of them. I mean, we can't immunize Republicans or Democrats. Okay,
let's talk about words versus actions. What about the guy that's decided he was going to build a 200-pound bomb and blow it up on the Washington Mall? He was caught dead to rights and red-handed. The guy you were just talking about was just threatening. There is a large difference between the sides on this, and again, it's all wrong, whether you're threatening or actually doing something. But it's gone too far on the Democrat side and the left-wing side of this nation, and it's really up to them to get control of that. You could say what you want about the president, but you don't see Republican leaders going out there and saying those kinds of things, like you have seen a plethora of Democrat leaders saying. And I disagree with you on what Eric Holder said. I saw him say it on video, and his intent was not peaceful. And by golly, Hillary Clinton is the leader of the Democratic left, the Democrat Party left in this nation, and she says you can't be civil until these people that we disagree with are defeated. What kind of language is that here in the United States of America? I am not going to sit down. I am not going to be quiet. I'm going to keep talking about that, because there is a difference between the two sides. I would defend her right to say that to the death, but she's wrong to say it, just like the President of the United States is wrong to say some of the things that he has said too. Obviously, I agree with you on that.
As far as Hillary, I think that what she said was absolutely stupid. I don't think that saying about what she said, it certainly was not violent. As far as Eric Holder, my God, I mean, he said specifically, now I'm not talking about physically going there and take violence. I mean, he specifically disclaimed that, and how anybody for that matter can say, well, he was advocating violence is beyond me. But look, I'm looking at just the other day, or at least a couple days ago, FBI arrested arrested 3 people for trying to kill some black people, some neo-Nazis trying to kill some black people. I mean, we can go on and on, left, right. I mean, what happened in New York just the other day, last week. It's a horrible situation. And
are you now saying that Republicans are equivalent to Nazis? Are we going there again?
No, I didn't say that. No, you brought up about
No?
no. What you brought up about somebody who was actually trying to blow up. Okay, so I'm just saying that you had a similar type situation. You had a far right person. Forget the fact he was a Nazi. He was a far right person.
Not Nazis.
Okay?
Let's get
Oh
something straight.
no! Don't,
Nazis are the National Socialist Workers Party.
please.
That is left wing. That is not far right. So let's be frank and honest here. I'm sorry, I don't allow that stuff to happen in my discussions. We define things with their appropriate definitions. Nazis are on the far left, just like communism and socialism is. Now, if you want to call them right-wing crazies or whatever, but that they don't. If you look at their language and their ideology, they don't follow conservative teachings, just like David Duke doesn't.
Let me tell you this. I've heard that. I've read that. You're an intelligent person. You tell that to any educated historian, okay? And you tell them that they were socialists. Now, I will wait. Hold on. I will grant you. No, seriously.
Challenge you. I challenge you. Next time we're on, bring the evidence that shows that they were.
I mean, look. Grant you that they started off with that name to get started. Okay, look, I studied I studied German history. I wanted to be a Nazi, so I took German history, okay, in university and majored. I'm teasing about wanting to be a Nazi, okay, but I mean, I majored in that. I went to studied in Munich, and I've read so much about it. Hitler, the Nazis went and they were attacking the communists. They hated Bolsheviks. They were at war with them. And I don't mean the physical war that the German country, throughout. It was a class warfare. The Nazis were the bulwark. The business corporate community were using the Nazis, allowing the Nazis to be able to defend themselves, to protect themselves against the communists and the socialists. So anyway, we'll have to talk. I will be on.
None of what you said proves that the Nazis, the National Socialist Workers Party, were not socialist and left wing. All they are is different factions of the same wing, and they're all on the left. And the Nazis nationalized all their means of production, just like the communists would. They just had a different type.
Wait, but
come on, you cannot challenge that. That's all historical fact. I've been to Germany. I've been to Munich. I've studied it. I've lived with those folks. I've worked with them, and if you think that they think that they were not socialist, I'm sorry, you got another thing coming.
Wait. There's no.
So it's socialist. They're different factions of the same ideology.
So so you're saying because they took over?
And I am an educated man, and I have a different viewpoint on that.
Okay, well,
as do millions of other people in this world.
So
because we look at the facts.
So if you're a right-wing nut and you advocate the nationalization for the purpose of race and for the purpose of nation, okay, you believe in nationalizing the country because of race. No. It's a theoretical. Okay, if you're right,
nationalizing anything.
If you this theoretical statement, then I got to run.
People try to put the Nazis on same thing as conservatives in this country and around this world, and I'm not going to let you do it because we don't believe in nationalizing the means of production and controlling a command economy, but the Nazis and the communists do.
So why were the Nazis at war with the Bolsheviks? Why was Hitler, always giving speeches about the dangers of Bolsheviks? I mean, and communism. I mean, why was he doing this? Just because in the name, they took the name because when they were first forming, it was popular, okay? And they had some elements who were, members of, who were associated. But their politics, their government, everything they did in terms of being nationalists, in terms of, being racist, in terms of being, I mean, they were extremists. They were extreme right-wingers. And that's kind of why
they're not right-wingers. They're extreme left-wingers.
Well, okay, so
they had a violent disagreement with the communists and the Bolsheviks. Maybe it had to do with the Jewish population in the Soviet Union, but it wasn't because their ideology was all that far apart, and they weren't right-wing.
Okay, so you're telling me that the current neo-Nazis right now who are total advocates for, and they're not the only ones. I mean, there are a lot of people who are advocating for Donald Trump, and I'm not in any way suggesting that only Nazis are. But the Nazis, wait, hold on. No.
You're talking about a minuscule portion of the people that have been discredited. We don't agree with them.
That's not my point. That's not my point.
And David Duke is a dang socialist, Steve. He's not a right wing. Go read his books, man. He wants to be the head of whatever socialist party, communist party, government control of the population becomes. And it has nothing to do with conservatism or the ideological right in the United States of America. It's just ludicrous to say that.
No,
okay, especially when you're talking 200 people or so that are totally discredited. We used to live in a country where the ACLU would defend the right of the KKK to have a march in a small town.
Yeah, they did.
Or the Nazi Party, because we knew, like I do as an American, that the answer to bad speech is more good speech. And that's how you fight it. You don't do what the things that the left and the socialists in this country are advocating, which is shut down free speech, shut down freedom of association, and shut down opposing ideas. And that's what all this discussion has been about. That's what Nazis do. That's what they did. That's what communists do. That's what they did. And that's what socialists like to do. And that's what you see coming. That's what's going on in Venezuela. They're all the same ideology.
What I was saying before this filibuster was that I don't think that any of the hundreds of thousands of Nazis or members of the Democratic Party or who support any Democrats, who do they support? They support Donald Trump. Okay? Now, they may...
I disagree with you. I don't believe that.
Oh, come on. Really?
And if there were more than 500 Nazis in this country, don't you think you know it? Good Lord. Hundreds of thousands? Where are they? They'd be out beating people in the streets. Oh, wait a minute. That's where the Antifa people are, the anti-fascist movement, who adopted the same symbols that the anti-fascist brown shirts adopted in Germany in the mid-30s, and they're using the same tactics. But you know what symbols they wear? They wear symbols of the hammer and sickle and carry red flags with the hammers and sickles on them. They don't carry swastikas because they believe, like you do, they're incorrectly, that Nazis are not socialists, even though they are. They're all part of the same coin, and they're all bad, and we must fight against all of them. And it's really sad that half the people in this country are siding with those folks.
So what you're saying is the Antifa and the Nazis are on the same side. I mean, that's really what you're saying.
Absolutely. They're the most fascist people in this country today.
They have the same...
Around the world, too. They're actually a global movement, not just a national one.
You're saying the Antifa and the Nazis have the same philosophical beliefs, and
Absolutely. Go look up the history. from the mid-30s in Nazi Germany, and you'll see that they were part of them eventually, and they are posing as anti-fascists while they are fascists.
Well,
okay,
well,
yeah. They bring shields and guns and bear spray and
no question about that. I'm not going to disagree.
They beat their own side in Portland a couple of weeks ago for carrying an American flag, for goodness sake. And nobody in the media really reported it except for those of us that are citizen journalists out here. But you get a guy with one little Confederate battle flag on one side out there, and you see hundreds of black-clad Soviet emblem, red flag carrying shock troops with shields and all kinds of other things, all dressed the same way and masked up. Nobody says a word, and I saw this from the reporter out in Portland, Oregon, but he saw a guy with a Confederate flag on the other side, and boy, was it bad. Oh my goodness. Come on, give me a break.
No, I totally disagree.
They conduct violence in the streets against political opponents.
I'm not disagreeing with you there.
One of these days, they're going to be stopped when they go too far against the wrong group of people.
Case in point, I just want to make one point, and that is that and then I have to go. And that is that under no circumstance do I support Antifa. I'm not in any way defending them whatsoever, and your descriptions of them I think are very accurate, and the saying that you're against fascism and engaging in violent tactics and doing things that are violent or threatening, like what happened in New York last Friday, I think speaks for itself. But if you're going to tell me that the same people for Antifa who were trying to go after the Nazis in Charlottesville, and you're saying they were basically the same people with the same philosophy, that just, I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense. Listen, I got to run. I thank you, and we'll have to do a show just on the issue of National Socialism.
Sure. Have a great day.
Take care of yourself. Okay. Bye-bye. Let me